Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Kahl, I want to begin by thanking you for your willingness to serve. You've been nominated to one of the most senior positions in the Pentagon, and you previously served in high positions in the Obama administration. But to be clear up front, from a policy perspective, I don't think there's much that we're going to agree on, as we discussed on the phone last week. Now, regarding our discussion last week, we had a conversation. Apparently, someone who was listening went into the press and claimed that you and I, and we're quoting you, quoting him, quote, said all the right things and may have flipped Inhofe and his concerns. First, I think it's pretty clear that we had significant disagreements, so I'm not sure how you got that impression, or he got that impression, or who it was. And second, and most importantly, I'm disappointed that a slanted view of our conversation was shared with the press. There's no reason for that. On our call, I told you that I would have a hard time supporting your nomination because of your previous policy positions, unless you've learned from some of the mistakes that you've made, which I'll point out. But I also told you that I can work with people with whom I disagree, and people are always talking about that with me and Barbara Boxer. We got more stuff done than any other two people. We didn't agree on anything except infrastructure, but it worked. I understand that my committee staff has gotten assurances that this leak didn't come from you, but it didn't come from me either, so who did it come from? Hopefully you can touch on this issue at some point during today's testimony. Even if we disagree on policy issues, we have to have some trust that we can have frank conversations, and that would be necessary. So now I want to discuss some of those areas where you and I have disagreed. Specifically, you had previously been against moving the U.S. Embassy to Israel, from Israel to Jerusalem, yet my recent amendment on the reconciliation bill, which ensures that the embassy will remain in Jerusalem, passed by a vote of 97-3. Those are Democrats we're talking about, along with Republicans. And the Biden administration has already confirmed it remain there also. You've also been a vocal supporter of the Obama administration's Iran nuclear deal, which gave Iran over $100 billion in sanction relief, part of which Iran used to fund terrorist groups, the very groups that rocketed the American forces in Iraq just this week. Now, as I've said, my colleagues and I are used to disagreeing with senior officials over various policy matters. That's not new. We had a very good hearing on Tuesday about global security and challenges and strategy. At this hearing, H.R. McMaster said something about our foreign policy that I think is really important. He said, and this is a quote, he said, "We need to adopt a nonpartisan long-term approach to foreign policy focused on competitions important to our nation's security, prosperity, and influence in the world." Great statement. What concerns me here is that hyperpartisanship, especially in regards to our national security, is inappropriate for a position of Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. We're talking about the number 3 position in we've seen this before, even with the previous administration, when the committee rejected a nominee in part due to his prior statements and hyperpartisanship. The position of Undersecretary of Defense for Policy requires a leader with judicious temperament and sound judgment. National security is too important for partisan politics. Unfortunately, in the past, in many cases, your public policy positions have been couched in partisan politics rather than fact-based analysis. I'll give you just a few examples, because I expect my colleagues will have other examples. I'll just give you 2 here. You downplayed the threat of Russia when Mitt Romney highlighted it during the 2012 election, and then alleged numerous conspiracy theories regarding President Trump's ties to Russia following the 2016 election. Next, you appeared to promote a fabricated Steele dossier which contains ludicrous and unsubstantiated accusations against President Trump. I realize you weren't in public service when you made these comments, and maybe at this time you thought you would never be sitting in front of us as you are here today. My point is this: we know that there is a new administration. We understand that. I didn't want it, but it's here. and that we will have policy disagreements that we will all try to work through. But how will you rectify the fact that many Americans, including those who work at the Department of Defense, know you only through your very partisan comments? How can we be confident that you will be a model of nonpartisan policy analysis, which is what the job requires if you're confirmed? And finally, just to hit on a couple of your previous policy predictions that have proven untrue, you said that ending the war, the Iran deal, might lead to war, and that didn't happen. You said the Soleimani strike would force the United States out of Iraq. That didn't happen. You wrote that it would be difficult to prevent a massive war on the Korean Peninsula in 2018. That didn't happen. You said that moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem would harm relations to Arab states, and in fact, Arab-Israeli relations have never been better. So here's what I hope you address during the hearing. What prior assumptions have you reconsidered? Where do you stand on these matters now, and how will you comport yourself in the position as Under Secretary of Defense Policy if you are confirmed? Where do you stand on these matters now, and how will you comport yourself on these policies? And how can you reassure this committee that your hyperpartisan advocacy will not drive Pentagon decisions? We've got a lot to discuss, and I thank you for being here today and your willingness. And I've sounded a little bit upset on this, and frankly, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.